Hi everyone, classmate Carolyn here. I want to take just a few minutes to discuss Chapter 2 of our Quantitative Analysis class with Dr. Chen. Chapter 2 focuses on the subject of selecting alternatives or sets of alternatives in decision making. I'll try to just touch on a few key highlights illustrated in the PowerPoint that I posted earlier today. And by the way, thank you for tuning in. So as we learned in Chapter 1, the most proactive decision maker will work to consider all the various alternatives. Now Chapter 2 reiterates that concept, but also focuses on helping us to see which of those various alternatives or sets of alternatives will potentially give us the best result. This is also referred to in the text as a best performance measure, best result. This is done essentially by eliminating or narrowing down our initial sets of alternatives. Now, since determining all the possible alternatives is the first of 3 steps in the proactive decision-making process, the number of alternatives should initially encompass as many potential options as possible. However, we do want to keep in mind that less or fewer options do afford us a faster, easier decision process. Chapter 2 is sure to stress that fewer options, the simpler the process. Although this is kind of a double-edged sword, because the chapter also stresses that the greater the number of alternatives we have to choose from, then the better we can reach an optimal decision, which is, of course, our goal as decision makers. Chapter 2 also points out that that certain decisions are considered sequential decisions, which are basically multiple sets of decisions. So with that said, they're more complex than the singular decisions. These sequential decisions build on multiple sets of decisions and therefore create a vastly greater number of possible outcomes for us as the decision makers to choose from. We can also base our selection of alternatives on quantities. Quantities can be singular or multiple, but the main goal is to determine the best performance measure. This is referred to as the optimal decision quantity in the text. As proactive decision makers, we would strive to implement very small increments of change to arrive at the best set of alternatives. We want to keep in mind too that in addition to using single quantities, it is possible to have 2 quantities to serve as the basis of our alternative decision process. 2 quantities would, of course, require using more complex two-way table. And then we do want to make mention that anything more than 2 quantities is usually too complex from a timeliness perspective to even be feasible, but I will say the multiple quantities consideration is discussed in later chapters, as mentioned in Chapter 2, chapters 15 through 17, I believe. The last item that Chapter 2 discusses for determining an optimal set of alternatives is the concept of using decision rules. Useful decision rules will help simplify the choices in the many alternatives and sets of alternatives. Decision rules do this by restricting attention in our decision-making process and setting parameters or rules by specifying quantities such as a maximum or minimum quantity. Well, that summarizes the major highlights for Chapter 2 of Quantitative Analysis. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next weekend, and we look forward to meeting you, Dr. Chen. Thanks for taking our class. So bye for now, and Happy New Year, everyone.